we're just introducing ourselves quickly.
Okay, hi, I'm Andre from the Cannabis Working Group in South Africa. We're obviously trying to get a more progressive stance and support from the government with regard to cannabis legalization. And to be honest, their engagement has been nothing but poor and disappointing, and I see no future.
Did you agree?
No, I haven't, but I'm just an independent sort of observer at this point. But I work in the mental health industry, so the drug industry is quite interesting for me.
What's your name?
Rob.
Rob.
Yeah.
Well, I'm Jamie Bridge, I've spoken enough today.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm Ndule Makasungula. I have the human rights background, but I'm here representing the groups. A cancer organization, which is a women's position, and also a faith-based groups, which are trying to come up with faith-based groups in harm reduction. So that's why I'm here.
So kind of over to you. I mean, there's two things really. First is if anyone wants to ask any questions about anything they've heard over the last 2 days, here's the place to do it, or if they want to discuss anything. The second thing being really, if you want to discuss things that we collectively want to be asking them next door, the government. If there's stuff that we want to be formally kind of thinking of. So just keep that in the back of your mind. But
Should we listen?
yeah, well, someone should. Yeah, we do need someone.
It's Maria's.
There's a little. I think there's a little spy hole over there. But if you could just keep an ear out. But no, over to you guys. Over to you guys. Anyone who has any questions, comments, things, anything they just want to get off their chest.
Yeah, thank you. My interest will be more on our influence in civil society, what giving us a society, in terms of influencing our government. Coming back to the same issue, how do we work with our government during the trust? How do we actively participate in the standards process up to the New York? So that would be more my interest, and how do we digest data and get data from government?
Should we break these down, or we can park them, or should we just have a discussion?
Let's just discuss it.
Sure.
Natalie's. Yeah. So yeah.
So the question was just like a couple things, like how does civil society engage the government? And I think maybe some of the challenges of that are often people have an adversarial relationship with the government sometimes, or don't know who the government is, or don't know what they're supposed to do once they connect with the government. So does somebody,
I think that
do people here who have...
It's such a good point to start, because I mean, we can join, our organisation is part of the New York NGO committee, and we have connections all over the world, and we attend forums and everything, but the actual sitting down face to face with the government becomes and I think that it was epitomised by the remark that's made by the CDA on Monday night at the introduction meeting, is you can talk all you like, but we're in charge. How do you get past that arrogance? How do you, because we're humble and we're gracious and we're wanting to engage, but there seems to be if anybody has any suggestions, I don't have
I'm wondering if there's somebody in the room here who's kind of had success with that, who's maybe, has developed your organization, or you've developed some relationship and partnership with government.
Here in South Africa.
In South Africa, or, also where you can kind of talk about like how that worked and what worked and what didn't.
So I think it's also coming from a palliative care background where the focus is, it's a gentler approach. We internationally, we've had really great relationship with Human Rights Watch that's in your face and confrontational, and then we come along and say, I see you've got this problem, how can we help? So both in, it works in the palliative care arena, it would also work in the problem of drugs arena, because there is a problem. So do you set yourselves up against government, or do we set ourselves up against government, or do we say this is the problem, here are some solutions, can we help you achieve them? It's more difficult than something that I'm doing in palliative services, and we went to the correctional services and said, we can help here. But now we're being invited to help draft policies, a number of different health policies. So we're part of the discussion in drafting policies. And I think that if we go at it with that aspect of rather not you doing, I think there needs to be some people who, the human rights people are the people who really must say, you doing it wrong, whereas other people must come and say, it's not going well, can we do this and this and this instead, and can we help?
So how did, just logistically, like, how'd you figure out who's the right person to talk to? You know, government's often huge, and people are, there's a lot of intersectional jurisdictions on issues and things, particularly drugs. You know, we have health people, we have justice people, we have law enforcement. Like, how did you figure out who's the right people to talk to?
So we particularly wanted to go to health, but we've also got the social development and correctional services and the education departments. So we go to lots of different people who don't talk to each other because it's all siloed anyway. And the most important person is the PA. That you make friends with the PA of either the head of health or the DG or the minister, and you get it through the personal assistant. You don't, I mean, we don't write to the minister and say, can we have an appointment? We now phone the guy that we've got to know, and we say, you know, has the minister got a moment for us here? Can you slip us in? So,
Can I bring a different perspective to this?
yes.
Because I have dealt with our government quite a bit, and in particular, David Bayer of the Central Drug Authority is the person in charge of the department that sets policy with regard to drugs here in South Africa. Now, as for the personal experience, the previous spokesperson of the Central Drug Authority, much earlier in my life and career, we actually worked together for 15 years. David Bayer and myself have actually worked together for 5 years. So there's a very personal experience, and I do know these people personally. Prior to this engagement in this scenario where we're now talking about drugs and drug policy. Using this personal connection, I made an appointment and we presented a path forward with regard to cannabis, because we knew that government had expected them to produce this paper but as yet had not. So we engaged them civilly and we suggested a path forward, and we've peacefully engaged the city and municipality in the city of Cape Town with peaceful marches regarding cannabis. And the response you get in return, in particular this person in charge with regard to setting drug policy in South Africa, has been a whole lot of mishmash and rubbish. And after 3 years of engagement, how much longer and harder do you have to try before something breaks?
Yeah, I've, along with Professor Benika, we've been trying to talk to anyone in national government, and we haven't got anywhere. We're both medical people, so we try and use that as an entree, a health issue. The drug health issue. We have made some progress in the Western Cape government, which is the opposition party led, the party that leads the opposition. And we got to a point where we were going around in circles. We go and see the minister of this, and then they send us to the minister of that, and then the minister of the other, and then we ended up with the minister of police, the shadow minister, I should say, of the national shadow minister. And essentially, we know what the story is with government and with the opposition. They don't want to talk about drugs. The Democratic Alliance, which is they are totally opposed. They're on the same agenda as the national government. You can see the posters sometimes around the city. You can talk to people like Andrew Scheiber about the Metro Police, which is the local police. They are enforcing the national drug laws. They are causing a lot of the problems. They consider themselves a liberal party, and in fact the Premier of the Western Cape was the keynote speaker at the International Liberal Conference. They are enforcing illiberal laws, and their policies are not to talk about drugs. We know that from inside. We thought we might be able to get to the senior members of the party, but we were kept at that level. and eventually we had to give up. That is the situation. We were also at the Central Drug Authority meeting last year, I think it was, and basically the message from government was similar to the gentleman who stood up the evening that started. We elected, we're going to tell you what to do, and basically the message from the Deputy Minister who opened the meeting was that South Africa was not ready to liberalise cannabis laws, because the conference was primarily around cannabis. So in this country, I can assure you, whether you try as a doctor from a health perspective, whatever, we've had very little success, and I think it's, I think you obviously didn't go in there as a specifically wanted to talk about drugs. I'm not sure, maybe it was more for the hospice palliative care. But certainly you tell people you want to talk about legalizing drugs or drug policy reform. They are not interested. They've got a very severe agenda. So I would welcome anyone who's been able to do it, and I'd love to actually arrange a meeting with anyone who's going to be a bit more progressive in government or in the opposition. But it is a big problem here, a huge problem.
So I've had great experiences. I've managed to work it. So my patients on tuberculosis substance use in institutions for care, and TB is a chronic problem. And it's a chronic problem in the hospitals, and so we designed a project that changed the sort of punitive way the hospital works into a harm reduction way, and we've got this operating in Rare. It's one of the 5 priority projects in the province. We did it all in about 6 months. So I've managed to work it, but it's because TB is chronic, because MDR.
Sorry, are you talking about TB or drug reform?
So TB, so it's, but I'm just looking, we're working with tuberculosis and substance use in the TB hospital. So we've got a harm reduction approach to substance use in the TB hospital. So, and
but I'm not talking about a higher policy level, not at hospital level.
But we're working it through the bottom. So I've had amazing sort of responses where it's become a priority project in the province, in very, very rapidly and potentially going forward. But we're coming in from a crisis point at the bottom, which means we've got an entry phase. And it means, so, and I think that's kind of what you're saying, is that if you've got a crisis entry phase, people are more pragmatic and willing to engage. And so I've had really amazing responses, unexpectedly granted. And we did the same thing. I contacted from the bottom and we worked it out. So maybe that, I don't know.
We do have a crisis point. We have 1,000 arrests a day for cannabis in South Africa.
I think the crucial thing here, though, is it's about, does the government identify it as a
That's
crisis
right.
event? Because
Yes.
it sounds to me like
Yes.
some doors are being knocked on and they're closed,
Yeah.
and other doors are being knocked on and they're maybe a bit more open. And
It's
it
easier
really,
to be
the crucial
sympathetic.
thing here is about what the government, if the government felt that it had to talk to you because they sense a crisis,
Yeah.
then they would. The fact that they're closing the door means that they don't see this. As you say,
No, you're
political
wrong.
parties across
You're
the
wrong.
spectrum are seeing
They
this
do
as
see
not
it
an
as a
issue.
crisis.
They do.
Myrtle's right. We went to see the minister, the Western Cape Minister of Social, I can't remember what his title is, basically to do with social security or whatever. And we had this meeting, and when I go to see a minister, whatever his portfolio is, I'll try and present it in a way that's appropriate to that portfolio. So you go to the health minister, and I'm talking about local government now, Western Cape. We went to see, and we did our presentation, and at that stage there was another uprising on the Cape Flats. And our presentation was that crime is driven to a large extent by the income from drugs, and if you deal with that in terms of legalization, we did the whole spiel. And he listened to us and basically said, well, thanks very much. And at that stage they were having a big project on the Cape Flats. When I drove home, he was on the radio. He had to leave the meeting early. Obviously he went for a radio interview because there was a big thing in the papers. This was a crisis, another uprising. We've got a huge gang problem in this province. He was called away early from our meeting. And I heard him on the radio driving home. And the person said, well, how did this project go? They raided everybody. And he said, well, we found 3 handguns and a couple of hankies of cannabis or something ridiculous. And the journalist said, well, why is that? And he said, well, because the police are corrupt. They're paid off by the gangs. The gangs rule thing. So it's a crisis here that's ongoing, and it goes up and down. They know there's a crisis, but they would not engage with us. They won't go that route of trying to reduce the harms and that. So I'm telling you, it doesn't matter if there's a crisis. These guys have dug their heels in because they're concerned, and we've been told that by senior people, that it's a vote loser, which I disagree with, but I'm not a politician. So it's a real problem here.
So, and I also can comment, because Andre, 3 years is very little time. It's a drip, 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 drip. Our friend, my colleague who's our advocacy manager, says she knocks on the doors again and again and again and again. So our advocacy has been going for nearly 20 years. So that's why we have been having success since about 2013-14. So it's a long-term thing, and the change of mindset isn't going to be over one meeting. It's going to be over again and again. And one of the spurs is when that person has been personally affected. So that's the thing that really drives change, is when they've experienced addiction, or the way that their child has been dealt with, or things like that. So that's the person to look at. But we also need to have, and I think that unfortunately in this country our press isn't as free as we would like it to be free, but the press is also going to have to drive the mindset change of communities who we've been told since I was born, we've been told that drugs are bad and drug users are criminals and things like that. That's a huge change that has to happen. So it has to be on many different levels, from the bottom up, from the top down, from the press and the communities, and all of us doing that kind of thing. But time is, and that
Can I just up the scales here? Yes, I hear time is of importance, but in this particular instance, there was a dying minister that used this in cabinet, and this was very much a pressing issue. The person in charge, David Bayover, knows this is a pressing issue. He said as much on public TV. So there is a expectation from our parliament that this get dealt with in a certain time period. We know they have spent a relatively large amount of money on their so-called gathering of information that had to be presented in evidence to Parliament, and that also had to happen within a given point in time. So in this particular instance with regard to cannabis, it doesn't have to be a 6-year thing. It had to happen by like March last year. It had to have happened. And we're still waiting for this. And what is the reason in that instance? What did we get for R500,000 worth of investment? A 1 8-page PowerPoint presentation. Are you for real? Is that what expected? Is that how you do your job? And
can I just ask quickly, because our rapporteur, who kindly was volunteered, has now disappeared off the face of the earth. Is there anyone else? The spokesperson who was going to, it was Natalie, but she...
No, I'm not at this.
So you're taking notes for Natalie?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, fine. I just wanted to check. Yeah, okay, sorry to butt in. Okay, JP, you've got this.
One has to keep the negotiation going by whatever means, but there's sometimes one has to have actions which enable the negotiations to go quicker. Let me give you 2 examples. One is apartheid said that at Groote Schuur Hospital you had to have people of different hues in different wards. And what happened is that the medical people there said, we're not going to obey this. And we are going to put people of different colours in different wards. Why? Because we don't have enough space in that ward. That was against the law, but that was the argument. And it created a fuss, but in fact that just became more and more, so that in fact, long before apartheid was abolished, in fact things had already changed, because civil society got up and did things. Now the other thing was with the AIDS treatment. People were providing AIDS treatment despite the fact that it was against government policy. In Mpumalanga, people got fired. And what happened? And then it mobilized the community further to in fact support that kind of enterprise. So in fact, you also have to, sometimes when things are so demonstrably wrong, society has to get up and stand. So it is part of the total mobilization of society eventually, like, as I mentioned, slavery, women's rights, gay rights, and so on. This is another one of those rights. The tsunami of change is happening, and we have to be part of that. Sometimes by disobedience, sometimes by engagement, but it will come. And it's how we do that, and it has to be at all levels.
With what I'm going to say now, you're going to realize most probably that I am a little bit crazy. That's maybe why I'm working in the field that I'm working in. I've worked in government services for 19 years. I was a provincial government director here in the Department of Health. And for various reasons, I decided to join the NGO field. I asked one question during the time that I worked there. I was a policy maker and a program developer. Many a times I asked the question in the department, who are making the decisions here? And that was the very, very last question I asked before I left the Department of Health. And at the stage I left, and I think it's still the case, our Department of Health is doing quite good in this province compared to the other provinces. So it still remains, you know, a question with me. Coming to the NGO sector where I'm working now, I realized that, and what you're saying, your TV experience that you are sharing with us, if you're not dealing with the issue that is seen as a public health problem, you've got a problem. Because then how do you enter the system, and how do you make an impact, and how do you find the champion people in the government departments who are driving the champion programs? And from my experience where I'm sitting now, and I'm in this field now for 10 years, only 10 years, and when I started working in the field of fetal alcohol syndrome, I know because I came from government, people didn't want to know about fetal alcohol syndrome. It's still very much the story, moms deserve the children that they have, or they get. The only way that we could get a foot in the door is to look at the policies, the existing policies in the government departments, and try to complement that and to work with the government officials in supplementing. So, for example, in our field, it's, for example, the Millennium Development Goals, you know, it's a big issue, infant and maternal mortality and morbidity. So we're feeding in, and sometimes you really need to tweak the message to get to that, to get people to buy into this, this line of thought. And I want to support what JP is saying. Quite often you have to totally step out of line, and now we are doing, and get the media on your side also. But also the scary part of getting media on the side, one must also look at where the media is coming from, so that they don't over-sensationalize the issue. And in that, trying to do good and trying to complement what we are doing, not violating the rights of our clients as well. So it's a very difficult situation also. But I just want to say, to get to the champion people and to see what are their drivers and to feed into that. That's how we are making slowly but surely impact.
Thank you. So can I just on that point of the media, because I think that's really important. I mean, just as a quick, it's a genuine question to you guys. Do we have allies in the media?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
We have allies in the media.
Yeah.
They're reporting on this.
Oh, yeah, quite openly and quite honestly, yeah, no problem.
They tend to be quite proud.
We are talking about South Africa.
Yeah. Well, yeah, maybe some, but I'm thinking. How about you?
Yeah, how about you?
Yeah, I think the media in my country need a lot of information. Because if the civil society are struggling to understand and appreciate these issues, definitely the media also need more information. So
No, look,
most of the media are pro.
they are allies, but as the media is, they do sensationalize stuff. And in that, sometimes the message does get a little bit lost as well. And maybe you have one or two people that are friendly, but for every two that are friendly, there's 3 other reporters that are writing, you know, the cop bus story and the police story.
So my experience is that, you know, most officials, particularly obviously like elected officials, are responding to what they think their constituencies want as well. And so one way, sorry? Well, I mean, you think they're not? So they're, I mean, they have to be reelected? You think they're just like, we don't care
No, I
what
think you're right.
constituencies are asking for? But I mean, I think on a local level, like, somebody's elected from a particular area. And so, I think we've successfully worked with the like polling and talking to people and community meetings and things to be able to say like, look, you've got political cover for taking a position that's this way or not, like, or talking to us about this or moving it. So kind of like setting, I think understanding some of their own political pressures for why they're responding to you in a way, or closing the door, or not talking is helpful.
No, it's
Like being able
fine.
to say like, look, we've talked to your constituents.
They've got,
You said they say they think it's a vote loser.
that is, yeah.
Yeah.
That's how they perceive it.
That's part of it, it is part of it, it's not the whole thing, but it is.
Are they
Well-
wrong? Are they wrong or are they right?
JP, yeah? JP?
It's exactly that. In the Western Cape, if you say we think it's a good thing to decriminalise drugs, the interpretation is you are supporting this drug trade and look what it's doing in the community. It's one of our biggest problems. People are
Sorry,
taking
JP,
drugs.
that's public
So it's the interpretation of the
Yeah.
politicians and what it will do to their votes.
Oh.
So you're getting soft on drugs, look what the drugs are doing to our community. So it's their information which is wrongly interpreted.
Jamie,
I
I
think
think
it's messaging, it's media, it's.
And that comes back to what I said earlier, what's in your belief system, which you have to change. And if you challenge that, you get the barriers going up and so on.
well,
So one has to get around that by appealing to emotions rather than to confrontation.
can I just say something? And with the upcoming elections for the Cape Townians here, you'll see it very easily because there'll be billboards with one of the mayors or the city administrators saying that drugs are bad. Now, if you look at a general drug information billboard from any country in the world, it uses that full big space to get the message across. In the Western Cape here, they use the patronage of the political leaders with the colouring of the political party behind it. And that's very costly. So at a civic level, at a municipal and national level, these people are actually using public purse to put out not a drug message per se, but a patronage message. And you'll see the face of the mayor or the Western Cape Premier, but you won't actually see something that enhances the drug message.
Yeah.
So they're using their place to ensure this
Let's give you
message.
a stat quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
A stat recently said that over 70% of South Africans believe that drugs cause crime.
Okay,
That's
so
one of
where
the
we are
problems.
in terms of that debate, yeah.
I think with our organisation is we see the hurdles and we try and then you're forced to be creative. And we all know that cannabis makes you creative. So that's why we use the plant to teach us how to be creative and get around these hurdles. For example, our next big campaign after we finish with quite a lot of policy stuff that we've been doing for the last few months, we're going to launch a Proudly Green campaign, which we're inspired by an American organization called Green Flower Media. We prepared it towards the end of last year, but we've also been very strategic about when we release that. We've got an extensive media database. We can say that 80% of the South African media are on our side. Often the media come to us, we don't need to go to them. So I think that just on a positive note, that we have to be, because we face these hurdles, we have to be really creative. And our Proudly Green campaign is going to be all about appealing to celebrities to come out of the cannabis closet. Because politicians are human beings, they are just swayed by the media just like all the members of the public in the country. And if that politician gets home and sees on his internet and he sees on his Facebook page that some famous South African actor or singer or rapper or somebody is coming out green, it just tweaks that little thing a little bit. So I think that we've got to be quite subversive and we're going to use the media to get to the politicians as well. Because people will bump into us I mean, the other day at the till at Woolies, some women came and tapped me on the shoulder and said, I saw you on TV, I really support what you're doing, I don't use it because my mother's got cancer. You know, so I think that we have to be really, really creative. We can't just bemoan our politicians and bemoan our policymakers. We can get to them through the media.
Myrtle, I just have to respond. Because here in the Western Cape, not only do you see Patricia DeLille's face as I have a drug problem, but you'll see Jimmy Nevis's face. Now, Jimmy Nevis is a local hip-hop artist type thing, and he's actively promoted by the Western Cape government to give this kind of message, both live in stage in the city or given the floor and the press media, paid for by the Western Cape government. So your campaign is going to cost you money. Their campaign is funded by public purse.
Doesn't matter, we'll find the money. We do.
Let's just go over this side quickly, because I know there's some comments, Bill and...
Sorry.
Quick one, yes. My name's Rob Zandart. I work in the recovery field, and I also happen to have worked 10 years in print media, and still do in Joburg and in Cape Town for independent, most of the major titles in independent newspapers. So I can, a couple of two really, is that yes and no, you know what I mean? So to get in there, I would recommend is finding a friendly journalist, you have to turn a journalist, or two important journalists.
And give him a sensational story about how policy has to change. That can be turned into a sensational story.
Yes, turn it into a sensational
Him or her.
story. Exactly. But you know what I mean? Even from the early days of newspapers like the Daily Voice and the Sun in Cape Town, which are the biggest sellers on the streets, especially on the Cape Flats, it's it's war on drugs policy. That's how it works. Sons who are taking drugs and destroying families and need to be wiped out. It's kind of a story that's been going on for 10 years now. 10 years now. So I'm all for this disobedience, finding a way in there, and also realizing as well that look, print media, we often give it more weight than it is its due. Circulations are dropping. People are getting the news in different places. So look beyond printed media to get the media exposure that we're looking for. You know what I mean?
And people are their own media now, right?
Yeah.
So
People
yeah.
are their own media. So I'm not quite sure where that is. I mean, a lot of it is going online very quickly. So which is free. You can get there without having to go through the very difficult doors of changing very staid media policies in Cape Town. Yeah.
Thanks, Rob. Bill?
Yeah, I may be very ignorant about the South African's political landscape, but I think that we must first of all look at what is the source of the problem. Because if we understand what the problem is, then we may begin to find solutions for them, because they are very complex, and there could be multiple factors within one sector in itself. Some people in government are very honest about their opinions, but ignorantly so. And so some level of education could change in some people their perspective. For some others, you must understand that some people occupy positions in government and make decisions when they don't have the expertise to make that decision. That being the case, they are likely to see your intrusion, or they are likely to see whatever you say as an intrusion on their authority. I mean, this is what they want to do, and you're coming to tell them something differently. That in itself speaks to their inefficiency, and they will hold on to it tenaciously. And that is why when we have strongly held beliefs, whether religious or otherwise, if they give us evidences beyond reasonable doubt, we still would refuse to look at it. And that's what is also happening with these people in government, especially when they lack the capacity to deal with these issues. Interestingly, listening in the last 2 days here, I hear people in government from South Africa saying very incredible, wonderful things, in my own opinion. They speak to the issues that we are discussing here. They seem to support the cause in one way or the other, and so on and so forth. That means that as individuals, we have some people in government who share the ideals that is being discussed here. So is it not possible to latch on to these people and ask them to link you up with like-minded people within government, within their sector, who also think this way. And before you know it, you can have a chain of people within the different sectors who believe in these things, and they could constitute a force to assist in each of these individual sectors. So I think the problem is not just a single problem, it's a complex problem, and we must find those complex causes and then begin to deal with them one after another.
Ashley?
Yeah, you know, I think, one of the things that we probably need to be asking the other side, which I found historically, it's almost as though the same scene plays itself over and over again now, where we're fighting a position that has already been determined. And that kind of determined position is lying in the power of some individual that signs it off. And maybe we need to ask them so that we can use the approach that she's used to get the 6 months approval, steps of getting into the places we want to be. But there's no way we're going to tie them down until we actually know what it is they want and clearly get it articulated in a way that it's actually a mapping exercise that grassroots civil society can understand what the expectations are. We also, I think, on a different plateau, need to be realistic that in this very room we divided among ourselves about a position. And so they look at us and say, well, one says A, another says D. So unless we organize ourselves as civil society, we actually never going to get a message across that it's united. And yes, sure, we're all going to have different opinions and views, but somehow we all wanting to see that there is at least some humane manner of dealing with the drug situation in our world, in whichever perspective we're coming from. So surely from our professional and expert platforms, we need to be able to, one, find alliance to be able to make sure that we get the best possible treatment and care for those that are really the beneficiaries of what it is we're advocating for. Because we're speaking on their behalf, and they wanting us, I can tell you this, they wanting us to sometimes say a message that's different to what we're saying to them. Like we are wanting them to not go and make a noise on a global front without consulting us.
So can I ask, I mean, like, you know, it seems like there's some challenges in just having conversations, like the folks on this other side of the wall here, for example, is symbolic. Like, should one of the asks out of this group be like, let's, you know, help us facilitate a dialogue, like help civil society sit down with people of the government, just talk about things. Nobody's necessarily committed to, you know, anything, but just like have that dialogue. Would that be useful, or would
not
that
just talk?
Ask them to listen to you.
Yeah, just listen, like just to talk.
legitimate
As a first
structure.
step.
Yeah.
So that you can articulate your whole spectrum of asks, they can articulate their viewpoints, and you can maybe just begin to
And also
understand.
so that it doesn't take us all our time and all our really limited resources to try and find the right person. We don't have much time for all of this shutting it down.
Can I just say that we've had that. Yeah.
Been waiting for ages.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. From someone who comes from the HIV movement, I definitely agree with the path. That's how we must do it. Number two, broader civil society that I know that are working in other kind of like more health response related type interventions know nothing about this issue in South Africa. That's a second thing. You are a select group or a select few that I've actually met for the first time actually in such a convening, which tells me one thing: nobody knows what we're talking about, and that is why we're not moving anywhere in terms of what we're doing. Number two, this is a racial problem.
Yes.
Majority of the kids currently on these, I don't know where you place them on the drug pedestals, on the nyalpes and the tuks, it's all the black kids that are on it mostly.
Yes.
And if we don't address it from a racial stance, we're not going to get anywhere, especially in South Africa. I'm just calling the kettle black. White people talking about cannabis, talking about this, nobody's going to take you seriously. It's going to be seen as another white privilege issue. Here they want something else. If we capacitate society, the desperate grandmothers that are out there, I mean, I've got family members who don't know what to do at this stage, who are so desperate, who are saying, how do I get this child off Nyalpe? Or how do we get them treatment? What do we do? Because that's what's happening. Everybody's being incarcerated. if we get the communities on board in the townships and say to them, instead of you guys now doing mob justice, instead of you guys sending these kids to jail, let us convince government to do 1, 2, and 3. They're going to be the ones that are going to basically lead this entire agenda. There, your movement building is done. And what is the next low-hanging fruit that we have? The provincial and local elections are coming up. It's an important time, a critical time for us to start, at least come up with 1 or 2 endeavors. In about 3 or 4 provinces in South Africa. Let us try that. I promise you something will work. We have a lot of low-hanging fruits. We can't go out there if we're not even sorted here. Let's start here. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you. Did you have a question? No.
Yeah, no, what I've noticed, we've been harping a lot about what happened, what went wrong before, and why we couldn't get through to government before. But the times are very different now, and we're very lucky that internationally people have done a lot of work, that you don't need to jump from the ground over the wall. There's already a ladder there, which is ungas. And to build on what Myrtle said about having media exposure and people's faces associated, when there's people's faces exposed to a real problem, people really are more invested, more impassioned, and it's not like we have to start again by banging on the same doors. We can build on the ungas that's about to happen and really gather a lot of support so that the ungas is an opportunity for those people to speak to our politicians and for us to develop after that, after the ungas. And I mean, within the medical field, nobody knows about the endocannabinoid system. There's going to be you're going to need to train a huge amount of people within the medical field, within the police field, and to try and isolate a few people. We may not have to do that because the world is doing that for us.
Thank you. So Bill, and then back to Andre.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, that could we also think that part of the problem is that we get involved at the point of implementation and not at the point of the planning for the because, government, people in government are very funny. In my country, they brought out some laws and they gave it to people that are not supposed to give it to. But it may take the next 5 years to redress that because it's already in there. So, is it possible for us to begin the process of saying, okay, let us get involved in the discourse, not at the implementation level, but at the level of formulation of whatever it is that has to be done. I think that if there's a possibility at that level, it will become a collective kind of thing. Most likely, you may not get what you want. And most likely, you will not remain where you were. So, for example, you are requesting for something, they say they can't give it to you, but they may not likely leave you where you are. They will shift a little bit, and that's how you keep on moving, one step at a time. You may not jump like a frog, but you could just crawl. And just
Thank you.
I'd like to just agree with that was said earlier. It is a race issue, and especially with Nyope. The people affected by Nyope don't understand, which is heroin pinch mixed with, they don't understand how to deal with this problem. And from the Central Drug Authority's perspective, and once again in a presentation to Parliament, David Baver's response was, oh, well, if you don't know what Nyope is, look it up on Wikipedia, that's how you make it. And that was his response to government. And this is the people that set policy regarding drugs in South Africa and how he responded to Nyope use in this country. And I can only agree with you. I don't know what to do. The people in charge of policy with regard to Nyope don't understand. And yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd just like to give you a bit of my background because it is pertinent. I worked in a rural practice in Botswana from the 80s, where when the HIV epidemic was just starting up there, and there weren't many doctors there, and we went to our local MP, who was actually a Minister of Health, and we said, we've got this problem at the moment, there's no treatment, the only way to deal with it is prevention. and he heard us out, and at the end of it he said, you know, we have a saying in this country that when you're in the bush, you don't talk about lions. So the government didn't talk about lions for a number of years, and Botswana had the highest rate of HIV in the world. My practice was a disaster. I was 50% of the patients I saw when I got into the 90s were clinically HIV positive. I didn't even need to do a test. People were dying. The rates were horrendous. It did have the highest incidence in the world. So the government didn't take notice, and the reason was, and Mandela had the same problem here with HIV. He went on tours, and the elders said, we don't talk about sex. They didn't. The people didn't want to talk about it. I had people getting up in my clinic and saying, why are you telling us we're HIV positive and the other doctors aren't? Because the medical profession were in cahoots. And it's the same thing happening now. And then we had Mbeki and his cohorts going into denial. We had people raping babies because they were told by the traditional healers that you passed an infection on. That's how you treat it. So if you had HIV, you had to sleep with a virgin. And then we had a massive increase. I've got a friend of mine who was the professor of pediatric surgery at the local children's hospital, and he had horrendous things to do. Babies of 3 months being raped. Why was there a big spike then? And I know, I had patients coming with the same problem. The denial was from at grassroots level. As I say, my patients didn't want to know. There was denial, and the reason there was denial was because there was no cure. There was no treatment even until AZT came in initially, and that was another story. And the medical profession were a lot to blame for this. I saw it with my local colleagues, and to an extent down here. They didn't stand up to the South African government. But at grassroots level, it was a problem. And when I got involved in this issue of drugs a few years ago, I saw the same problem, and we discussed that, JP and I, the similarity between the mentality against HIV in the early days and with drugs now. And I'm afraid there is a huge amount of denial and misinformation at grassroots level. Good luck getting there. I think it's important to start down there. Obviously, I'm not part of the larger community, and it's from the top. The similarities are actually quite frightening, and it's all to do with denial and not being able to approach the thing. And the politicians, they didn't want to talk about HIV. They don't want to talk about drugs. It is very similar, and what I would really like, if you don't mind, when we go back to the plenary meeting later, is asking the government people, please, don't listen to your ministers. If you agree with us, go and tell them. Because they are they're not acting as a conduit. We've been to these meetings before. They are listening to their ministers who, as that gentleman said, are often misinformed. They're not scientists. They don't understand the problem. And they're just spouting what they're saying. And their job is to listen to us and look at the evidence and take it back to the politicians. So that's my message, is that what's happening now is so similar to the HIV epidemic in this part of the world.
Just really quickly, I just wanted to promote, just to put an idea out there, because I'm sensing there's a lot of frustration from some people that they've not been able to open doors. There are some doors that are kind of open, but we need to use them better. As Lynette said, that we talked about the need to kind of mobilise a better civil society, more coordinated civil society kind of voice. One of the things that IDPC does is the Global Support Don't Punish campaign. So this is a campaign that's focused on everything that we've talked about here for the last 2 days. It's a civil society campaign. Countries use it to get a voice heard. We do it on the 26th of June, which is the United Nations Day Against Drugs. That's a day when the government, in most countries, I don't know what they do there, but in a lot of countries, the government will release a press statement saying, "Oh yeah, we seized this much cannabis this year. Look how great we're doing. We arrested this many people." Or in China, they used to publicly execute people on that day to celebrate the war on drugs. So that's why we do this on that day, so that we can put another message out there, saying it doesn't matter how many drugs you see, you're ruining people's lives and you're not having any impact. Now, I mean, Wilson can talk about how it went in Zimbabwe, and they were, it really helped to open doors in Zimbabwe. I'd be really, really keen to work with some of you guys on doing something here in South Africa, the next 26th of June. And what happens in cities, maybe if you can talk about Harare in a minute, but it ranges from some, you know, some countries have had a music concert in the middle of the city, or a protest, or a demonstration, or a march, or all kinds of things, you know. And this isn't just in Europe. This is across Europe. We've had African cities doing this, European, Asian, Latin American, North American cities. 140 cities last year. So it allows you to do something here with a local message. You know, you tailor your message as to what you want, what your ask is, yeah? But you piggyback on a global campaign to help you get more media attention and to help you get more traction by saying this isn't just 20 people in a room in Cape Town saying this. This is actually a global movement. And so I'm offering that up. I mean, I don't know, Wilson, if you want.
Yeah, and it's exactly like the Nancy. I mean, you're wanting to go simple enough so that they can actually articulate it, even at the highest authority, because they don't necessarily have the capacity to understand what's happening down here. And you're going to have a mess of it. So, I mean, we've got 83 NPOs that focuses on substance abuse, whether it is treatment prevention, early intervention. So, I would definitely take this across to them and make sure that, well, I can't make sure, I will motivate for this to happen. If we can have a global approach like this, if it happens same day everywhere, 3 or 4 provinces, man, we have a voice to speak.
So maybe that answers some of the questions in ways. I wear lots of different hats. One of them is I'm chair of an NGO that uses capoeira. It's a Brazilian dance martial art. It's a youth development tool over the Cape Flats. I've worked on the Cape Flats for years. And the reason I got into studying substance use is because that was I'm an anthropologist, so I study social systems, and it was the biggest thing that was spoken about all the time. So my question around it is, I don't see the opinions that are held here are not broadly held on the ground. And so I think we are talking for 20 people to some degree, and I think that's perhaps the biggest challenge, and it is a race issue. It is the average person who's living with 4 or 5 substance users in the immediate facility and vicinity. These are not people who are other. They're part of home. They're part of family. So there is definitely that I'm going to work with. But the opinions that are held here are not really held, and so it is health facilities. You sit with nurses who are very anti-substance use. It's from so the people presenting these ideas at a national level are very much what's going on the ground. They're not coming from nowhere, and so I think that the challenge is much bigger, and maybe part of what you're doing is answering it, because then you can have all these organizations coming together. But it's
thank you very much. I just want to talk a bit about that Support Don't Punish campaign program. In actual fact, it was a program which was actually on the international level. But what we did, we actually received it. We looked at our environment, and then we said, no, I think this program, it can actually be very useful on the ground. So we had to go to the grassroots. We mobilized. We organized our dramas, musical show, right? We took old men, old women, the unemployed boys and girls in Harare. And then on the 26th of June, that particular year, we actually booked the townhouse. That's where we went. And then we also invited the advisor to Robert Mugabe. He actually came. He gave a speech, which was very good, that speech. It's actually online, that speech. And it was a successful campaign. So what you can simply do now, you look at your situation in South Africa, and then you, like what Lynette has been saying, you take that campaign, go to the communities, you will see what will happen. But it really works. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry to come late. I've come with great relief from the law enforcement. It's very likely to be said. Please forgive me if it has. But I'm just thinking of the politics of it and how to go forward. I'm thinking in my own work, which is very much in local government at the moment, with the different role of metro police rather than South African police. And I think that what was made very, very clear by President McCallum right in the beginning is something that we can actually take forward to, that is, this is the policies at present hit the poor. Right? People don't think this way at all. But the people in Hanover Park and Potchefstroom and all these places in Atlantis, if they realize that the consequences of current policy actually hit them hardest of all, and that it is an elite question that we're dealing with, couple of people have pointed out, you know, the history of the non-illegal drugs is one of elites protecting their interests. Sugar and caffeine, sugar and coffee, when they were first introduced to the West, were treats for the rich, right? And they've continued that special status. So it's about injustice and about oppression through laws that are based on discrimination. And particularly in the South African.
Because I think for so many people, drugs, as we've said, are just a moral issue. It's moral. It's immoral to take drugs, and I don't think a social injustice trumps the fact that it's evil. So I think that maybe, and I'd like to ask this gentleman in the middle, I don't know his name, if there's any feasible way to talk to faith-based organizations. Maybe it's not, maybe that's not a thing that can be done, but I think without getting faith-based organizations onto thinking about care as, as a religious duty rather than punishment as a religious, somehow, I don't know what the levers would be there. I think there's no way that huge communities are going to be reached without that.
So yeah, Maria and then Andre. So you go after Maria and then we'll go back that way.
Okay. My contribution basically goes in line with what Wilson talked about the campaign, and I will want to relate it to what happened in Ghana, because it was really a great opportunity for us to make inroads to certain institutions that we've been finding it difficult to do. During that particular campaign on the June 27th, what we did was basically to invite most of the stakeholders in the various institutions to be part of the discussion, and we made sure we brought on board people who are using drugs, or people who have problematic drug use, and those who have actually gone through rehabilitation, and to be part of this discussion. So we came under one roof and we discussed the issues and to see how we could address it. And I bet you that was an opportunity for Ghana to be able to make some entrance into some institutions. And as we speak now, we've been able to get civil society to be part of the National Steering Committee to come out with a document that will represent Ghana at August. So I will encourage people who are here to actually make use of this Support Don't Punish campaign, because it has really opened doors for some of us in our countries, and I think we should take advantage of it.
Yeah, so we've been part of the Global Marijuana March for the past 15 years, and that's grown to about 15,000 people in Cape Town annually. And it's a very happy, multiracial march that reflects every part of society, and most importantly the marginal poor that are affected by cannabis. And it's always been a happy march. We've always invited government and the press have always been very favorable of it. Yet any requests made of government are just not looked at, considered serious, they poo-pooed, and that's where it ends. So, 15,000 people, and it's just simply ignored. I don't know what else to say. Because in South Africa, what does work, just by the way, you might experience it when you try and get to the airport at some point. You'll see burning tires on the street. That kind of protest works here in South Africa.
Just to add on to Amin's issue, it is a moral issue, but morals change. So accept that this person is using substances as a parent means that I'm accepting the fact that that person will not be redeemed. So in the long run, so you're removing the option of redemption after death. And so it's a real critical issue that you're working with, because it's a very religious, sort of society. And so to say you need, because of the moral framing, and I'm not saying it can't change, but at the moment when you're saying accept substance use, you're saying accept in your child, for instance, you're saying accept that your child will not have redemption after death, and it's an incredibly difficult thing to say to someone. So I'm throwing it in there, it's like a very anthropology, but the moral stuff is incredibly deep-seated in how people look at their families and the world.
Wilson and
Good. Now, I'm very interested in the issue of the moral issue that you brought up. But incidentally, over the years, it's very interesting to see that very, very traditional churches and all that now much more open to distributing condoms and so on and so forth in order to help step the tide of HIV/AIDS. That's something that we could never have dreamt. And I think the simple fact is that it got to a point that it stared them right at the face, that even when they are denying it from within them, they felt that it was time to do something about it. And so our position about things could always change, maybe when something really happens. And I'm also very concerned, sir, when you mentioned the contribution of the professionals to this issue in terms of how clinicians are treating people who have substance use problems. And I think it seems to be everywhere, but I think that we have forgotten some of the oath that we swore to, what it means. Because I remember my boss asking that a patient should be discharged, a patient of mine should be discharged, who was supposed to be going through detox. Because there was no bed space, and there's another patient who has schizophrenia. And I just looked at him in the face and I told him, sir, that if they force that patient to be discharged, I would encourage the patient to sue this hospital and sue. I told him right to his face. Now, I'm not saying that that's a good approach, but that's me, all right? And that kept that patient in the hospital. Now, the point that I'm trying to raise is this. Even people at hierarchy, that was the medical director who was speaking. He did not understand that, and I had to take time to explain to him, even though it sounded to me as if I was wasting my time, that that gentleman had a right to be treated, had a right to go through detox, and that the best way to treat him should have been in the hospital. So I'm beginning to wonder that if the community, the medical community, are so ignorant, what do we expect of the sufferers themselves, the patients? The medical community should itself stand for the patient first. Then the patient may begin to see how they can have a voice. That's why in Nigeria, when they were talking about, the patient group, the users and all that, forming, a network and so on and so forth, the question I ask them is that, have we actually formed a network of caregivers in this country? And then you want the people that are so marginalized and stigmatized to form a network. Let us first of all form a network and form a group that can adequately advise government and assist them so that when they form their own network, it will work good. So I think South Africa has to do something about this professional community to have a better understanding of substance use.
I think it's a lot of important points today is particularly on the last gentleman discussion. And there's a lot of psychoeducation that needs to go out, specifically in the health field as well. Coming from a university setting and so forth, we're not specifically trained on substance use disorders, and it's only specialist training afterwards, and it's definitely something we need to introduce in medical school as well as in the various departments of psychology even. So a lot of what you said actually rang true.
I have two questions actually, and I think broadly is what I wanted to get from this group before we actually had to kind of go report back is what are some of our ideas after INDAS, especially what are we thinking about moving forward? Maybe building onto the idea that Jamie, Maria, and Wilson spoke about, those days of action, number one. And number two, Scott, very interestingly, how did the US get the injectable heroin issue right? What did they do right that we could probably, that you know that we could probably kind of like get on?
The US didn't, that was in Canada.
Oh, it was in Canada?
Yeah, that was
Can you speak, tell us more about that, please, if you do know more.
Sure, it was done as a pilot program, and so I think it was original. So it was interestingly, it was a 3-point pilot program that was supposed to be cities of Montreal and Vancouver in Canada, and one city in the United States. And the political pressure around actually prescribing heroin in the United States eventually made them pull the plug on the study, and so it ended up being, the first study was done in Montreal and Vancouver, and it was a relatively small population of about 150 people. And I think it was just committed doctors. It was a government that was open to looking at this as an intervention to treat a few people, that really did not respond to care.
Naomi.
So that was they have these cute names. So the first study was Naomi, which is North America Opioid Medication Initiative. That ran with diacetylmorphine, heroin. When they were done, they basically, people were doing well, but the study ended and they had to cut people off of that quickly, and they were given the option of going back onto methadone, which already had failed them twice to get into that study. So there were actually some really serious outcomes in the community of some known deaths, some like a lot of relapse, like people just not doing well. But they weren't able to put in a prescription heroin program because of the regulatory issues around it being heroin as the drug. So they couldn't go from a pilot study to an actual program. And so what happened then is in the course of this study, they discovered that another opioid, hydromorphone, which was used as a control drug, had a potential to also do work. So they designed another study that was testing hydromorphone versus heroin, diacetylmorphine. And so that study ramped up, showing a lot of great results. They were about to cut people off of that one again, and so we ended up doing some legal action to make sure that didn't happen.
So that comes back to your strategic litigation that you were doing.
Right.
Well, it wasn't litigation, was it? But legal action.
Yeah, it was litigation. Eventually, the government introduced regulations that said we couldn't access they couldn't access the heroin under the program in Canada, which allows application for like untested drugs or drugs in other jurisdictions to come through, which we to close that loop. And so we sued them for that, and that's still ongoing litigation. But I guess the point being, like, you know, it's a response to an effort. So it's the medical community driving it is important. I think something initiatives like that. And pilot program.
Sorry, John.
Sorry.
Sorry, I need to ask a question as a note taker. I'm completely lost. So can I ask before we go any further?
You're not the note taker. You're the.
You don't need to take notes. Someone else is taking detailed notes. You just need to speak for 5 minutes. You only need to take enough
I've
notes.
been taking notes for my hour.
You just need to take enough notes for you to be able to talk for 5 minutes.
This is not what I understood. And what I wanted to say also, I've been away, and I'm sorry, for the first 15 minutes. So I maybe you talk about the objectives of this meeting, and I'm coming. This is going and.
So it's a
writing. I don't know how to report.
okay. So it's a free form discussion around like things that bubble up. So Undale you kicked this off this hour and a half conversation with a question of how can civil society better have a dialogue with government, and so that raised a lot of issues around what things work with government, what roadblocks are there with government. There was I think the desire to have more open dialogue or facilitated dialogue with government, and then these other conversations.
So supposed to report on the notes that reply to this first question, right?
Sure, as you see fit.
Okay. We can talk in the break.
Sure.
Sorry, John, you've been waiting patiently for 15 minutes, so please go for it.
Just a small footnote on faith committees, and then I have another point to make, which is relevant to what's just been opened up. Most of the more conservative faith organizations are highly authoritarian. And this makes them in some ways seem strong, but I think they're actually quite fragile in some ways. Because there must eventually be a gap between what the big boss keeps saying and people's daily experience. So I think there is a gap there, particularly because I think, I've mentioned to a couple of people, I think there's a big difference between morality and ethics. Morality is slogans, ethics is about behavior. But I want to, in relation to the reporting and the way forward with civil society, something that very strikes me through this conference is, like yourself now, people reporting on programs, projects, or experiments that have worked or not worked. And I think there's so much good stuff going on. I've been saying this in South Africa for the last goodness knows how long. So many good things happening, but people involved in them do not have the time, and sometimes they don't even have the habit of reflecting. And this is a great shame. It's almost worth somehow the organization appointing some kind of roving rapporteur who would be able to go to cross-question Yessa here on the Kulisa experiment with the homeless people, or to go to Shwani, to Professor Hukum, and say how his teams have worked and what are the lessons there. Because it's not about best practice, it's about best thinking. What are the principles that have helped to make something work in this particular context? What are the obstacles? And to be able to articulate that and then spread it around. So that, I think, because otherwise so much goes to waste that could be moving forward. Thank you.
So I think the, I'm sorry,
what I've been considering is, so what next? Because in the short term, it's with IDPC kind of coordinating the civil society feedback to UNGAS. UNGAS is the short-term goal. And then the medium-term goal are the things we've been talking about informing the public and educating the medical profession and the political decision makers, seeing if we can't have an advisory group for government and doing everybody adopting the support don't punish activity on the 26th of June, and John's idea that we have to document and reflect on the activities that have had good outcomes, and the other one I had was engaging media. So in the long term, what I have in mind is that we are trying to affect societal and political change. So it's those kind of three areas that have got, there's lots of work to be done.
So it sounds to me like movement building, and so locally, but also maybe regionally, and and then there's also internationally, which we're gearing up internationally around the UNGAS now, but it doesn't necessarily mean we have to keep it at full on pedal to the floor in that level. Like I think at some point we draw back in and kind of say like let's focus more locally and regionally around these issues because the international landscape is not going to be prominent for a couple of years. But I think I'm gonna stepped out, but I think like the idea like there's 20 of us sitting in South Africa who have the same opinion. I think there's actually a lot more, and so I think part of the challenge is like finding out who those allies are, and those could be people working in the human rights community that are against they're looking for criminal justice reform generally. Obviously, people working in healthcare, HIV community, people looking at issues around race equality, or environment. Like all the issue with drugs is that it cross-cuts across all these issues: gender and youth and environment and poverty and race and all of these things. So I think what I see internationally is that there's a lot of drug policy organizations, and then there's this larger group of organizations that don't know they're drug policy organizations yet. Like they haven't made the connection. We haven't been able to connect yet about how their mandate intersects with these issues. So I think you probably have like lots and lots of supporters for the issue when you start talking about drug policy as creating imbalance around all these other things, in gender issues and poverty and race and human rights. And I think the thing like my impression of South Africa is you actually have like a very strong civil society generally that's challenging bad policies, that's going to court, that's advocating. And so I think the issue is they're just not doing a drug policy yet. That's my take. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm here. Okay.
Yeah, I know we're not part of the police forum.